Hey guys, so I've been continuing to work on the Branded Despia list, post-ban list, obviously the one Branded Fusion. It is a notable hit, and I'm just trying to find best ways to try to play through Ash and also Imperma as well as best as possible. I am trying out Grass now. I think it just serves as a really good Ash bait, and I kind of more so see it as just kind of like a second copy of Branded Fusion, at least in terms of Ash bait, and I'll go over some of the other card choices as well. But yeah, let's just get to the list. So this I'm gonna breeze through. It's the three Abbas. No, nothing crazy, but there. Three Aluber, one Tragedy. I am still playing two Clem. Some people I think cut it to one, but I think the second one always comes up. At least when I'm going first, I do side one out going second, and also just being able to revive Kid as well kind of is nice post balance because we have to try to record that Brand Fusion back from the graveyard or banished as possible. So I'm still playing two Shredded, and keep in mind this overall is actually a 55 card list with Grass. I get it. People might say, hey, why aren't you playing 60? You're playing Grass. Well, the thing is, just because I'm playing Grass, I don't want to completely dedicate my build towards it. I did make some adjustments because of Grass, but at the same time, it is a one-of after all. And so, I felt that even without Grass, if I had 54, 53 cards, it was still a list that I really liked, and that's why I decided to still play it at 50, try to make things compact. This always goes back into the deck anyways. I've never, ever felt that I needed like a third one. Double Merc, I am still playing Allure. I'm just trying to make sure that it's as smooth as possible and consistent because the deck is very vulnerable to hand traps now, and I'll talk a little bit about that. This becomes very important because of just being able to revive, or rather, record that Branded Fusion back, whether from graveyard banish, because let's say you used Fusion Duplication, the Branded Fusion gets banished, or let's say you already used the Retribution once, the Retribution is banished, you can also put that back, so it's kind of nice to have, and this is something that now, going second, I still have to keep it in. I want to talk about this one, Maximus. So another way to play through Ash now is basically, I've been playing Nadir. I've tried cutting it, but I ultimately decided it's still kind of really, really good because the deck is way more vulnerable to Ash now with the one Branded Fusion. Like you can't just add High Spirits, for example, off a Luber, and then eventually get to Branded Fusion through Kit, just to kind of play through potential Ash because your opponent's probably going to just Ash the High Spirits now anyways if you search it off a Luber because it's not likely you're going to open that one of Branded Fusion. So really, really hurts, and I find Nadir Servant is good. The reason I want to talk about this is that originally I tried also just cutting the Maximus because it is kind of a brick, right? And also just playing Lulu Lilith in the extra instead, just so it's a little bit more flexible and it can still, for the most part, lead to Gimmick Lock, but I decided the extra deck is way too tight, and we'll talk about it when we get there. Obviously, if you have the room for Lulu, it's still ideal to have that and this as well as your regular extra deck stuff, but it's just way too tight, and by putting this in I felt I could cut down on that extra deck slot. One Lubellion, two Serenia. I always usually play Magma, but again, I just try to want to make it a little compact, and really Serenia is the important one, especially with Branded Fusion at 1, and also with Grass milling. This is something that's nice to mill as well. The one Gimmick Puppet, this is kind of nice to mill off the Grass as well because you don't have to rely on Granule anymore. This is one of the minor adjustments I made because of Grass. This is nice when you hit it with Cartesia so that you can make it into Granule through the graveyard instead. That's always nice. The other thing is, you can always make something like, let's say, Mud Dragon, and that's not nice because Imperm is another big one that really affects this deck, especially because it doesn't make Thrust live. So having that targeting protection for that Aluber is very important. If you're trying to make like a Albaz fusion with this, you do have to be careful because let's say you return this and an Albaz or use them as fusion material. Remember, those two have to go back into the deck. So let's say you make Lubellion, then now you might not have an Albaz to actually make like a Mirror Jade anymore unless you don't build a Shredded or another Albaz. So starting with the spell, let's just move this out of the way, and we're gonna play Grass. So this is, I was originally never really a big fan of this card in Branded because, the mills, sure, Branded has a few cards that really do have like some graveyard effects, but really it's nowhere near the level of something like Tearlaments or maybe even Lightsworn in terms of mill effects. At the same time, if you have this, you're probably going to start with it. It's just an Ash bait. It's nice to have. Sometimes it can really help in terms of at least getting you to Branded Fusion, but again, if they know you're playing Branded Despia, I don't see why you would even bother ashing this because in the end, you're just trying to get the Branded Fusion through this anyways. There are maybe minor, very rare circumstances where you manage to make like an Albaz fusion and you have a Merc in hand because you hit like a Sharon, for example, to fuse, and then you can like Merc the Ash on the Branded Fusion later, but that's just like so unrealistic that, I basically see it as two copies of Branded Fusion. That's sort of how I imagine in my head in terms of probabilities, and it's just a nice little Ash bait, so that's why I decided to play it, because I just feel like Ash is so detrimental against this deck now than ever before. 3 brand opening. Another minor change I made to this list was the double branded in red. So that's partly because of the grass mill. If you mill one, for the most part, it feels bad because you probably have to use the retribution on the Branded Fusion, let's say if you mill it. But the thing is, you know, back when Branded Despia was tier 1 for the first time in 2022, people were playing 2 copies anyways. It was actually not that unusual. And I actually really like, whether playing grass or not, playing 2 branded in red now. Again, especially with Branded Fusion at 1. I should also note with grass, if you have an Aluber in hand and not Branded Fusion, I probably would still use the summon first and search that Branded Fusion, because if you mill it and you have no other way to get it back out of the grave with the particular hand, it really does suck. Unless you have opening, then I would just start with this, because you can always dump Clem or summon Clem instead, dump the Retribution if you dumped Branded Fusion off that. High Spirits, I mentioned earlier about, you know, people would just probably Ash this anyways now instead of Branded Fusion if you search yourself a Luger, so that play doesn't really work as well anymore. So that's unfortunate. I don't like playing 3 of, like, it's a good card, but it's just such a particular 2-card combo, and you would have to also play more of the Dragons like Shrouded, more Bestials, then it might work better. If you also play Sprint, that also works better for like Gimmick Puppet, I guess, if you happen to hard open it. But for the most part, I think I like it at 2, but it's just not something I want to dedicate it to, unfortunately. Branded White, this comes more for the recursion play, now that Branded Fusion is just at 1. The loss is still there. Deployment, nothing has changed. Double Nadir, I was originally playing 3. The thing is, going second, it's not very good, right? I mean, game 1, if you lose that roll and you go second, then it's kind of not that bad, because let's say you break the board and then you don't have much. Let's say you just end only on a Mirror Jade, and then having this extra is kind of nice. But, you know, post side, they're going to have more dedicated going first cards, and you need to dedicate extra slots for going second, and it's just not very good at that situation going second. So I like it at 2. It also plays, it sucks when your opponent has Shifter and you get punished by it and you can't use it anymore. So the other thing is also, I should mention, because this can also add from grave, if the grass, let's say, mills the Maximus, it's still okay. You can still add it from grave instead, or even like an Albaz, and it can help play through Droll a little better. And speaking of playing into Droll is a lure, but I felt that, you know, we just really have to max out the consistency. You know, this deck can definitely just end on like an Imperm, for example, if you don't have Cartesia access, and at least trying to dig through some ways to get into some kind of either Branded Fusion or at least Nadir Servant. These 2 cards. This can also now dump Sharon to kind of like trigger a fuse, especially if you already milled like a Cartesia. I've done that before, and it's kind of nice to get the granular access alternatively that way. And I'm still also playing Super Poly. I've always liked this card, but also it's just against like Tenpai, you get shifted. You know, you really, this is like the one thing that will at least help you not get OTK'd. So I really like it. Also, you're playing Garura anyways in the extra because of Maximus. Just you get the extra draw, so I was like, I might as well play it. It makes the extra deck pretty tight though. But and then Eclipse, this is actually really more so used as just a way to protect your Aluber off of Imperm. Not really as for going second, but it is obviously good going second as well. Also, will force out Ash potentially when you go second. If your opponent doesn't really know what you're playing, if you can help break through the board, then that's kind of nice. 3 Thrust, good for Fusion Dupe. The problem is, again, Imperm, it doesn't play into Thrust, so that's where it really makes things worse. I also decided to take out the Talents. I've never been a huge fan of that in this deck. I mean, obviously you can play it. I've played it at 1 for quite a bit as well myself, but ultimately in the end, I felt I just didn't bother needing it. Call by and Fusion Dupe and the Retribution. So looking forward to the Ultra reprint with this one, so definitely use my discount code. Card Brawlers and Tier Games, Hakuna 5% off. Extra deck, double Albion. My friend Adam actually mentioned how you could potentially cut 1 for like a Sprint, for example, just because now that you don't have extra copies of Branded Fusion, like in terms of follow-up, the ad isn't as valuable. I think I'm too much of a coward to cut the Albion, because I do find it still comes up sometimes. Lubellion, double Mirror Jade, Titanic Cloud, Sanctifier. I don't know how this is legal. Rimbrum. Obviously, ideally, you want to play 2. The extra deck is very tight. I've always been so accustomed to playing just 1 Granule that for me, I've always made it work, so it's fine. Masquerade, I want to talk about this. Originally, I was like, oh, I guess I'll just put it on the side. The thing is, whether it's Masquerade or where it is, it's very important to have a Despia Fusion monster in your kind of like extra deck that's not in the side. Because of, let's say, like Branded Red, you can like play around Aluber, or rather Impermanence Aluber, go into like whatever Despia Fusion, and also let's say like Cortesia, maybe you've already gone through the Granule, and in like a grind game you want to just trigger another fusion so you can trigger Loss, for example. It just really comes up. And even Sharon now, that is also something I've always just liked Masquerade, because it just puts a lot of pressure. And you know what, nowadays so many meta decks, they just take so long. The combo, I've been in situations recently post-banless, you know, this is the only reason I won. It's because of time rules, but whatever. This one's very, very strong. You know, just especially with, let's say, grass, and you're probably milling some Dark Dragons too. Makes it easier to make this. Guardian Chimera and Super Poly stuff, Mud Dragon. Again, I mentioned about how Sharon can now make this and help you protect with Imperm, for example. The Drago, this is good Super Poly for Yubel, and then the Garuda for Tenpai, as well as also just sending it for Nadir Servant for the Maximus and getting the draw and just having a little extra plus. And finally, onto the side, this is definitely up for a lot of changes. I decided to actually just cut hand traps entirely, just because of a larger deck list, and I'm playing a lure. I'd rather just draw into board breakers, and that part has been going well so far in post-banless. The problem is, after breaking the board, not having enough gas anymore to actually make something myself. So triple evenly, I really like this. I just find that any deck that plays that succumbs to D-Berry, usually this will do well. And also Flunder, you know, at local level, you're probably going to see it still. And this at least does something against them, unlike D-Barrier. Double Dark Ruler, double Droplet. Again, I'm not playing hand traps, just a lot more flexible space now, and I really like having some kind of monster negation, as well as Feather Duster. One Lightning Storm. This is especially when I'm blindsiding going second, because the opponent scoops. It happens a lot with this deck because you gimmick lock them and they just don't want to bother playing through that game one. And so this is kind of more flexible than Feather Duster because it can hit monsters as well. Cyclone, and I actually have like 3 kind of like more flex spots for the side. You can choose whatever. I decided for this one, I played a 3rd Cosmic. It was more local relevant, right? Like, because Labyrinth players. This one only because I hate the fact that this deck cannot out-tower, so if your opponent is playing Curly, like, it's kind of impossible if they hard make the X-Play Noir. And this one is more of a troll, just for Konami, because they're reprinting this in the Megatins, and they're going to make a rat edit so that it's supposed to be what it was in the OCG, where your opponent cannot set either, not alone, let alone summon. So it's good against something like Flunder, which I see a lot in my local events, but again, I'm just kind of trolling here. You can just play whatever. I even tried, like, there can be only one as well, but I think the side deck has become pretty flexible once I cut out the hand traps. Alright guys, so that was it for the deck list. You know, I've really tried hard to try to make it as smooth and consistent as possible. I definitely do like the list, but it is an uphill battle because something like Yubel is just their end board going first is admittedly really, really strong. But, you know, try to just hang in there, and at least with grass we get a little bit more unique style of play, I guess. Maybe not necessarily optimal, but it is something now that we lost Branded Fusion. But anyways, really look forward to hearing your thoughts on how you're adjusting your list. I really want to make sure that we all work together and kind of improve the list together. So anyways, huge thanks to all of you for watching. Big thanks to my patrons and sponsors as always. Huge shout out to my wife for recording, and well, take care guys.